Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. This is insane. The amount of people that we have joining right now, Ken. Um, way over 500 of you already in the chat. Thank you all so much for joining us for this much needed discussion. We're going to give it a few minutes because this is a very should we say oversubscribed session. We are going to have to take just a few moments whilst the chat room fills up. But then after that, we're going to jump into hopefully what should be a really good discussion. So let's take a look. Oh, people from Iceland. This is incredible.
Iceland. That's my buddy Ingvi.
Oh, there we go. Right. Okay. Awesome. Got Nurul from Malaysia. Rana from Palestine. Hello. Yeah, this is as I imagine, this is truly global and truly international, as it always is with these webinars. And big shout out to the Wakelet community for being able to share all of your ideas from all over the world. I think that's what makes this community so special, is the fact that we are global and we all get to share our stories and our ideas and our culture with each other. I think that's what makes this community so powerful.
I agree.
So we're going to give it just a few more minutes because it does tend to slow down. But I would like everybody to join and get the chance to be a part of this discussion and to kind of see what we have to say today. So I'm going to give it just a few more moments, and then we should be able to kick it off. Once again, to everybody who's joining, this session is going to be recorded. It is going to be available to everybody, hopefully within a few hours of recording, and we will be sharing it with a Wakelet collection as well. So some of the concepts and some of the things that we discussed today, and which Ken shares with us, will be provided to you in a Wakelet collection. So thank you all for being here. I think Ken will probably start it off now, and as people join, again, just please introduce yourself and let us know. So, okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to a very special and serious session today with Ken and I. We had a discussion, Wakelet and Ken, in the run-up to this event about some of the issues that we're going to discuss today, some of the issues that are going on in the world, and we mutually felt that we should use this platform and this hour and this community to discuss racism, inequality, and injustice. Now, we feel that these subjects are a lot of things that people tend to avoid speaking about. And personally, I don't think that that's because people don't care about what's going on, but rather that a lot of people, and like myself, just don't really understand what's going on. And by that, I mean, although on the surface level, it's easy to simplify the issues that we're going to talk about today, they tend to be more complex and intricate than a lot of us think. And hopefully today, we should all come out of this discussion with some new perspectives and outlooks. And Ken said something to me very profound, which led to the trajectory change in this session, which is that this community is like a town, and townsfolk, town people come together in a town hall to discuss key events that have happened in the community that impact us, and that's what it is today. So on the 25th of May, last week, a black man named George Floyd was murdered by a white police officer in Minneapolis in the USA. And the video of his death was shared millions of times online. And once again, for what seemed like the 100th time in the past few years, we all watched in shock and horror at what had happened. And this isn't an isolated incident. And in the year 2020, we as a human race clearly still have a lot of work to do. So today is not going to be about Wakelet, and to some extent, it's not even going to be about education or edtech. It's going to be about unpacking the issues that have surfaced in the aftermath of this tragic event. And as a community, as I can see, an incredible global community from all over the world coming together to learn and grow. So please use the chat box to ask questions, even if you feel like they may be difficult. I know that myself and as a community, we need to ask more questions because it's the only way that we'll learn. And also feel free to share your thoughts and views about this session online on Twitter. And please do not feel any obligation to use the Community Week hashtag or even mention Wakelet on this one. So we're about to begin. I hold my hands up and I say, as much as I can look at this incident and racism in general, and be horrified by it, I still do not know or understand the many levels of issues that surround it, both socially and systemically. And Ken has become a really close friend of mine, and we've had private conversations before the session. And just in those conversations, I've already learned so much, and I'm already thinking about things in a different perspective. So Ken, I'm going to pass it over to you. Please introduce yourself and let us know where we're at, and then we'll go into some questions. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. And, I'm looking at the chat and I'm recognizing a lot of names there. And so, for those of you that I do know, thank you for joining. Those of you that I haven't had the privilege to meet in person, thank you for joining. And I think part of the good thing of us getting together around this conversation and, throughout this session, we certainly want to be able to field any questions anyone has. We won't be able to get to all of them, but as many as possible, excuse me, is really looking at, where we are and ultimately where we're going. And so for us as educators and educator community, think about your role in regards to you as an individual, you and your school or your school system, and then us as an educator community in general. And how we need to get past being reticent or resistant to having the meaningful, the important, and the right conversations around all of the above. The incident that Ms. Bashir it's not new. It's been going on. In fact, nowadays you're seeing more of it because we have our phones and it's captured. But it's been going on, and then there are other varying areas of degrees of trauma that all of us have been experiencing, especially those of us in the Black community here in the United States. But, we have a global audience, and I can say and share with everyone that, I know that there are degrees of inequality and isms, if you will, whether it's racism, ableism, classism, any one of those things, genderism throughout the world. And so my goal and our hope in this conversation is to really unpack to some degree, as much as we can in this time, unpack, where we are and where we're going. And I think one of the big things for all of the educators on this chat and all of us to be thinking about going forward are two things. So I'm seeing a lot of, and this is a good thing, I'm seeing a lot of educators that are starting to recognize I need to do the work. I need to read, I need to learn. Many are understanding that they need to take a step back and listen. But what I also want to be clear on with this is that, and in fact, it's funny, I'll share this short story because there's a number of folks on here that are friends with me, even on Facebook. I posted on Twitter too, yesterday was the Blackout Tuesday where everyone puts a square, for Blackout Tuesday. And my thing is, okay, that's great, but what are you going to do? And it's important as we kind of dive more deeply in this conversation is to understand that, there's varying levels of us working together in this. So there's the ally level, then there's the accomplice level, and then there's a co-conspirator level. And what I see a lot of is that in the ally level is what's called performative allyship. For example, I post something saying that I'm with you, but then that's the end. Okay. The accomplice is I'm with you and I'm willing to have a conversation and maybe do a few things. What we need is co-conspirators. We need people to say, not only am I with you, my actions are tangible, and if necessary, which several of my friends actually did this on one of my social media platforms, is they commented and said, look, you know what? Ken shouldn't have to expend the energy and the emotional labor to teach you what you said is not correct. So we want to have a discussion with you. Those are co-conspirators. And in terms of what we're thinking about with education, what I would say is what we have to understand is that the individuals make up the system. And it is important for us as individuals to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what is my role in this? What can I do to dismantle the systemic components of education that perpetuate race, disconnects with culture, all of those sorts of things? And so for me, with everyone on this call, we need to do the internalized work, but then that also needs to lead to the action of the externalized work. And so I'll share a story real quick with everyone here. I got a number of messages from friends, not just in the US. And they're like, I'm going to read and I'm going to listen to podcasts and I'm going to learn and things like that. And I said, no problem. I said, the next thing you need to do is you need to scrutinize and interrogate what's going on in school, what's going on in your school. So who designed the curriculum? How is that being assessed? Is it standardized, which I will share with everyone here? And the whole point of a meaningful conversation is be unfiltered. I'm telling everyone here now, if it's standardized, it's racist by design, period. Anything that is standardized is generally standardized towards an upper middle class cisgender white male. So if you don't fit that category, then that standardization isn't designed for you to be successful. And then in terms of that, if you start looking at how we design our discipline or our punitive structures, how are those designed and who do they adversely affect the most? And so, and I do want to dive more deeply into some of these things, but, if you hear the terms, social and emotional learning or restorative practices, I know her, I don't know her that terribly well, as Dina Simmons actually even said, and I agree with this, anything that's involved with social and emotional learning, if it doesn't involve anti-bias and anti-racism, then it's no different than saying it's white supremacy with a hug. And so we have to really start looking at what are we doing as individuals in our participation within the system. And now you're seeing people saying, okay, you know what? I need to think about what I'm doing and I need to be better and I need to do better, which is one of my favorite quotes from Maya Angelou. But then also now it's time to start interrogating the system. Who gets elected to the school boards? Who determines the measures of success, whether it's you in the classroom, the school, the district? I'll share with everyone real quick as well. Here where I live in the state of California, thankfully, although I have guarded optimism, the University of California system determined that they were going to no longer use the SAT and the ACT as a component to the admissions process. Those are culturally biased. And again, going back to anything that's standardized is going to be racist by design. So, for me, and the privilege of being able to spend this time with you and with everyone on this chat here, it's really us thinking in terms of, what am I doing as individual? Again, what am I doing as an individual? Was my participation in the system? And then now how can I dismantle my own biases and my own active and inactive participations within the system and then speak out against the system itself?
Yeah, I think based on what people in the chat are saying, I think that hits home, and I think it's very refreshing to hear these words being spoken, especially in a forum like this. Just going on to the last thing that you made note of, Ken, which is really, I guess, the first question of the session. I know that we've got a lot of people asking questions in the chat. Please continue to do that, and also use the question and answer feature as well, just so that your questions will be put separately to me rather than me having to scroll through the chat, because it's very, very active. But the first question that we wanted to discuss was, what can the let's just say the average everyday person do to help this cause, to help kind of heal this division, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their gender, their ethnicity, their culture, or anything else? Because I think that as we approach situations like this, a lot of us feel almost paralyzed, right? Because it's like we want to be able to speak out. We know that we should speak out. Then at the same time, we don't know what we should say. And we don't know whether it will make an impact. And at the same time, we also are not sure that if we do speak out, how is it going to be interpreted by the group that we're speaking out about? Will people, because we have to acknowledge that there does exist a call out culture, especially online right now. People are very quick to, I guess, interpret what you're saying in a particular way. Yeah. So how do you kind of come to terms with that sort of dichotomy between saying, I want to speak out, but I'm worried that if I do speak out, somebody could take what I'm saying in the wrong way? I don't know if I've articulated that problem well, but hopefully people should get it. But yeah.
So a couple of things. One, any systemic change, revolution, anything of those lines, not going to be comfortable, not meant to be comfortable. And so for those that want to say something, this is why I think it's beautiful that we have the community here, because ultimately, if I'll give you an example, if I see someone speak out, I know where their heart is, where their mind is, and where their growth is, and what their intent is. And of course, intention means nothing if it's not tied to tangible actions. Then, think about it in terms of community building. It's like I speak out, someone's going to say something against me. Nope, I'm going to defend them. It's not I don't want to conflate that with the mob mentality or the public shaming kind of component to it. But It's a quote that I share in one of my newer talks is, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. And so ultimately in this context, we have to be willing to speak up, and we have to trust each other, which again, this goes back to what you had referenced at the beginning. We're a community here. We have to be willing to speak up and know that we have the community backing behind us and that we all are in this together. Again, and I'm sharing some stuff of my readings because I read a lot. Alan Johnson did an analysis of, well, aren't systems just people? And the metaphor he used is, it's the forest or the trees. And so to me, and he identifies in there that it's the forest and the trees. So all of us are trying to grow, but ultimately all of us make up the force. And so we have to grow together to do it. And so we can't be reticent to speak up. We can't be afraid to make mistakes. And here's the thing, Misbah, and here's the thing I hope people in this chat, isn't it interesting? And I've been through this over and over and over again with lots of educators. Isn't it interesting that we talk about how we want students to demonstrate degrees of, and I can even break these down, degrees of resilience and grit and fortitude when it comes to failure, but yet we as educators and the adults don't embody or embrace that ourselves, especially things along race and culture and bias. Isn't that interesting? And I think that in many cases, adults tend to be resistant to having the conversations because they don't know how to have them. And if you want to tie it to education, part of the reason why they don't know how to have them is because they were never exposed to them in the first place. So you see how that's the cycle. I don't want to have these conversations, so I'm not going to have them with my students. So my students become adults. They don't want to have them. And so then it just continues and it rolls over on us. And so at some point we have to look at it and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to stop the cycle now. I'm willing to be vulnerable. I'm willing to be genuine. I'm willing to be purposeful. I'm willing to recognize that there is a lot of learning that needs to take place, but I'm not going to stand for the way things are as they currently stand. I'm no longer going to be acceptant of the status quo, because the status quo, keep in mind, someone's always benefiting from the status quo. And it clearly, I mean, the inequities, look, Misbah and I had talked maybe about a month and a half ago around the inequities that are even more magnified because of the global pandemic. All of us are battling the virus. We're trying to stay safe. We want to make sure our kids are safe and healthy. We want to make sure our students are safe and healthy. And so you're seeing that delta. So it's already magnified. Much of it already existed. It's already magnified even further. But now think in terms of what virus exists in your school system that you can unfold and unpack and dismantle as well.
Exactly. And I think that leads on to my next question, which has come from somebody in the audience, which I think is a really, really good question. So obviously, like I said, our community is quite global, and a lot of the issues that America is facing with regard to race seems to be quite American. We also obviously have issues across the world when it comes to racism, but it seems like America, particularly right now, is quite divided. We have a question from an educator that's just come in the chat saying they would like some advice or your thoughts. They're in the deep South in the States, and they're worried about career retaliation for speaking out about this. What would you have to say about that, Ken?
That's a good question, and it is something that we always have to be aware of. I will start off by saying that racism is not limited to the borders of the United States. I've had the privilege of traveling to over 50 countries, and I've experienced myself anti-Blackness in most of them. So, in regards to that question, again, if it's one person who's speaking out, then you do put yourself out there. And I don't want to tell anyone in this chat or this that be the voice, speak up, be loud, be the squeaky wheel. Because ultimately I understand from my own experience what being the voice and being the squeaky wheel is. And so I'll share with everyone here, because I think it's important also, as a side note to this, that we start to destigmatize some of what I call our human condition. So for everyone on this chat, I taught in the Los Angeles Unified School District for almost 20 years. I am no longer in the classroom. I was the only Black male teacher at every school that I worked at, which is tied to racism. Okay, let's be real. And so my entire career was met with nothing but microaggressions and constant marginalization, gaslighting, all of the whole list. And ultimately, I ended up having to leave the classroom because I went on illness leave, and then for anxiety, and I ended up having to take antidepressants for 2 full years. And so when that comes up, as far as an educator saying, how can I do that? This is why the beauty of us here, it has to be a community, so that way it's not just a singular voice. In fact, here, I'll share, this is an analogy I share in my workshops. And I use this as far as a sports analogy. So, and it's funny because the word is very popular now. So a Peloton. Okay, so if anyone who doesn't know cycling, a Peloton is when you see the cyclists all in a row, so that the first one is essentially the drafter for the rest. Think about that metaphor for us when it comes to this. We have to be a Peloton together. And in some cases, when we're tired, who's going to take the front of that to draft for everyone else? We have to be willing to do that. And it's not easy. But guess what? It's either we do it and we do it together, or we won't be successful in isolation, period.
Right.
We won't.
Right.
And, you know, and I don't, here's the thing, I don't hold it against some of my former colleagues who have now reached out to me and recognized that all the things that I was saying at my last school and all the things that I was trying to do, and they felt bad because they never spoke up. You know, it does no good for me to guilt and shame them, because ultimately I don't do the guilt and shame thing. I do the let's challenge each other, let's do better, let's support each other. And in fact, for anyone in the chat who is a fan of, you know, unfortunately he's passed away now, or he's he's not with us anymore, is one of my favorite more contemporary hip hop artists was Nipsey Hussle. And he has a quote that I like to share. And that is, you know, if you look around yourself and you're not inspired, you don't have a circle, you have a cage. And so for us, when you look around yourself, who are your friends? Who's supporting you? Who's challenging you? Are they uplifting you and filling your bucket, or are they essentially the equivalent of a cage because you're not growing? And it's the equivalent of, you know, basically a human echo chamber, if you will. We surround ourselves with only those that are going to make us feel good about ourselves and comfortable with ourselves. Then ultimately we have a cage. And so, and I have many friends that I do appropriately challenge on these things that I support. But that's the key is the challenge and the support from a loving and purposeful perspective, or is it from you know, a guilt and shame? And so ultimately we have to be in this together no matter what. So hopefully that answers that question, because, you know, ideally it wants to be a community-based effort, not in isolation.
Ken, we've got so many incredible questions coming in. You know, some really hard-hitting, potent ones as well, which I think you know, are difficult to discuss, but at the same time need to be discussed. Given that this is a town hall discussion, and that people, as long as they're asking these questions, I always have this rule where, you know, if one person's asking the question, then 1,000 people are thinking it, you know? So I try and take each question and address it. So Nairi Clark asks, what is the difference? Yeah, I love Nairi as well. What is the difference between the hashtag All Lives Matter and the hashtag Black Lives Matter? Because I've seen the hashtag All Lives Matter, and I've seen it in the context of people calling it out, but I also know that it is used seriously. I think that a lot of people, they see, whenever these kinds of struggles surface, they see it as being, well, you know, why didn't X conflict have so much publicity around it? You know, what are we supposed to do about the people in this country who are suffering here and the people in my community who are suffering? You know, there's something that's profound and powerful about the hashtag Black Lives Matter. And there's something equally profound and also slightly disturbing about the hashtag All Lives Matter. Could we just get your thoughts on that before?
Yeah. So, you know, unfortunately, what we're seeing now with that is gaslighting. So for the audience, if you're not familiar with the term gaslighting, it's basically a way of making you question your own reality and your own perspective by circumventing something that you're saying. I call it conversational terrorism. So when we say Black Lives Matter, it's not a binary. It's not saying Black Lives Matter, so I matter and you don't. It's saying Black Lives Matter because we haven't mattered before. And yeah, sure, all lives matter, but Black Lives Matter too. And so it's conversational terrorism. It's a way to try to circumvent, you know, the meaning behind those words. And, you know, until Black Lives Matter, then all lives don't matter. Because if they did, then we wouldn't need the hashtag in the first place.
Right, exactly. And on that note as well, this is a question that I'd like to ask you, Ken, because I've had conversations about this with my friends, and I'd love, like I said, I want to learn, and I want to try and do what I can as an individual. I think that a lot of the time we're left not knowing what we can do. So I recall a situation back in 2012 that was the hashtag Coney 2012.
Yeah.
And I remember waking up one morning and seeing this hashtag plastered around everywhere. I don't know if anybody remembers that, Coney 2012. And everybody on my friends list had this, Coney 2012, make him famous, this type of thing. And it generated, I did a lot of research into this because I remember that it just went away, right? It just went away. God knows what happened to it. And I remember looking at it, and people who were, I think intellectuals who were discussing it, said that it is a great example of slacktivism, right? So my question is, a lot of people have been taken to Twitter and Instagram to share hashtags. Obviously, there's movements like Blackout Tuesday. Instagram had the black boxes on it.
Yeah.
Do you feel like these things are of any help, of any aid, or are they an example of selectivism? And what's the alternative to that?
It is selectivism, and for the audience here, it's my fear is that it is performative alley shit. It's a performance. It's easy to post a black square. Okay, great, but what are your actions behind that? What are your intentions behind that? Do you even know why it exists? And what are you going to do going forward? And, and I won't call out individuals or individual groups, but for our audience here, if a business that you are a consumer of or support posted a black square, ask yourself, who are they hiring? Who's on the board of directors? Who makes the decisions? What are their hiring practices? All those sorts of things. I've even seen it where several schools, universities and programs within university, they posted it. And here's an interesting way. So I saw that, and I took I'd say about 10 minutes yesterday, and I started Googling some of those universities, and I went and looked at the demographics of their faculty, and I'm like, it's performative. You're posting this black square, but yet I look at your faculty and I see no one that looks like me on your faculty. And then if I then Google and look at the demographics of your student populations, like, no, it's not good enough. No, stop doing that. You're better off just not trying to co-opt the purpose behind it. And so, for us, again, it's understanding that there are things that we need to do that, and I've shared this with some of my close friends. There's things that we need to do. There's things that we should be doing. Not everything is a social media moment. And ultimately, these little performative things mean nothing. And in fact, I'm going to be real with this whole audience. Right now, you know what some of this stuff feels like? Pro-black is sexy. That's what it feels like. Because I'm watching where folks are finding out that they have a black friend, or they're like, okay, well, I'm going to go and do this so I can meet someone. And, it's like, it's performative. It's performative.
And
and lastly, I'll just share for the audience here. It's for everyone in the audience, look around yourself. Who are your circle of close friends? Is it based on intent, proximity, convenience? Or have you said, or sheltered yourself away from exposing yourself to others? And I want to add, and that ties in with education, because ultimately education is a microcosm of society in general. And this applies across the board because we do have a global audience here. What are the representations of the curriculum, the books you assign, the scientists, the mathematicians, all the historical narratives? I mean, if it's not diverse, then ask yourself why. And those are the things that we need to start to change. I really, really strongly believe that, and especially because of, if you look at, and I'm glancing over at this chat here, if you look at the fact that we have global representation, one of the things that I have been afforded the privilege of doing is making a lot of strong cross-cultural connections with folks who do not live in the United States. We don't have things in common if you were to look at our upbringing, but we're able to find commonality and make each other better as a part of that process. And so ultimately, that's what I would want all of our students to do. Part of dismantling racism and making culture more strongly connected, that's where the technology comes in. That's where we can expose ourselves, our students, our friends, our family to narratives that we maybe have been denied access to. You know, because other than that, then aside from that, what does that do? That ties into our biases, what perpetuates the stereotypes. And then if you look in terms historically of like media representations are a byproduct of the stereotypes that those that tell those stories have. Right. And they've never been called on it, or they're starting to get called on more, but they rarely were called on or challenged on it.
So Ken, like we obviously this is a yeah, I'm going to assume and go out on a limb and assume that most of the community members who are joining us here are educators and work in a school environment. And you mentioned before, you know, the concept of systemic racism and standardized structures and systems and that type of thing. So when I was a child, I nobody knew where I was from. Nobody knew what race I was or what ethnicity I was. It's interesting, and I had a very obviously my name doesn't exactly spell out where I'm from. When people look at me, I don't know what they see. I don't know if they see. I think they can see that I'm not white. They can see that I'm not black. But there's this whole shades like the conversation we had yesterday. There's loads of shades involved in this, and there are two parts to it. For me, I'm mixed race. I'm dual heritage, so I've got a lot of different ethnicities mixed around, and it's almost like I remember being at school and thinking, where do I fit in this? Yeah. There's a clear divide in this whole kind of scenario, this system. Where do I fit in? And at the same time, and this is going to what a lot of educators are saying in the chat right now, school is these are formative years for children. A lot of the things that they learn, if we're saying that racism is taught, you know, that it's not inherent in us at all, it's taught, people have to learn it, then obviously the learning process begins with the family and then school as part of the socialization process. Correct. So for teachers who want to involve these conversations of race and of discrimination and want to keep them on a level through which children can understand and through which their younger students can understand, surely that's a great way of you know, helping this eventually, because we're in 2020, right? It's like, right. This is crazy. I know Jamil put out a tweet saying it's not 1820, it's 2020. It feels like, you know, a lot has changed, but at the same time, very little has as well. Right. So back to my point, because I know that I'm rambling and I do this a lot, but you know, what can a teacher do? What can an educator do to facilitate these discussions with their students and start that socialization process off on the right foot, and maybe prevent students from you know, having these thoughts and hanging around in these groups that reinforce these negative beliefs, because they must come from somewhere, right?
Right. Well, what you're talking about, first of all, is there's two things. One is you identified one of the what I would say pillars or foundational components to being a culturally responsive teacher, and that is validating the students' identities. I will go out on a limb and guess that most of the folks in this chat at some point have been othered. And so if you think in terms of our cultural identity, there's race, there's socioeconomic status, there's language, there's religion, there's ability, all of those things. At some point, somebody probably has experienced a being othered. And so for us in that context, and I do want to add, because I noticed in the chat also, there's a lot of folks that are bringing up components around being an immigrant or things like that. So let me back up a little bit and explain that what you just shared is the difference between a racial identity and a racialized identity. So first, what's important for everyone here to understand is that race is socially constructed. And in fact, I can, and hopefully it'll show up. This, my background, it's stamped from the beginning by my buddy, Dr. Kendi, okay? And race was socially constructed to create a hierarchy to justify exploration and colonization. And so ultimately what we have to think about is whatever my identity is more important to me than how others see me. And it's like you just shared, people are going to try to, you know, and it's a byproduct of our brain, our environment, our conditioning, is we try to compartmentalize, you know, things that we consume. It's no different than you think about how you memorize a phone number, even though no one probably memorizes numbers anymore, but you take the numbers in chunks, you compartmentalize it. That's how our brains work. And if the only stimuli you've been getting is a component of the dehumanization, or again, that racial hierarchy of someone else, it's people try to create an identity for you that may not be aligned with how you view yourself. And so I think one of the most important things for us to look at as educators, and I'll go back to it, is really interrogating the curriculum. Does the curriculum perpetuate a racial hierarchy? Does it create an other, or a way in which a specific group is othered? Are they dehumanized? Or, again, that whole thing about hierarchy, anything. And I remember having a conversation with Dr. Kendi about this, because ultimately he said anything that creates a racial hierarchy is racist, period. And I talked to him about the whole idea around segregation or assimilation. Guess what? Both of those are racist, because both of those are based on a racial hierarchy. And then, of course, you go into, because I have seen it with a number of folks here in this chat, that, you think in terms of many of the countries that I've had the privilege to visit, there's a whole idea around colorism. Certain people that have a lighter skin color are seen as higher on the hierarchy than those that have a darker skin color. Now, what is the lighter skin color usually associated with? So, it really is complex, but, and this is where I encourage everyone, as you go through the process of reading and learning, ideally you're an attentive listener and you're an intellectual observer, that you start to see these things. And as you start to see them, you see how normalized they are. And I know I'm throwing a lot of resources out, and I see folks in the chat are putting some as well, which thank you all for doing that. One of my favorite books that I ever read as an educator that literally changed the course of my life as an educator was Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Dr. Beverly Tatum. Right. And she uses a metaphor
just the title of that has so many has my mind spinning.
Yeah, that's I'm telling you, that book literally changed the course of my life as an educator. And Dr. Tatum talks about life as a moving sidewalk. And here's where you go into the action versus inaction. Those that benefit from the status quo, walk with it. Many who don't want to get involved, teaching is not political, which is wrong. It is. Think about it. Policy and politics drive the standards, and they drive what the measures of achievement and success are, as well as how funding occurs, which we don't have enough time, but I could get into the whole thing around funding, around the history around redlining, and all of those sorts of things. But at any rate, those that remain silent, i.e. or complicit, they just stand still. But guess what? The moving star is still going. We have to turn around and walk again. And again, I don't expect educators to take this on, and you shouldn't take it on in isolation. We have to build a strong, deeply rooted community. Again, going back to the forest of the trees, we have to build a strong forest of which the roots of our trees are so deep that no matter whatever winds are against us, the gaslighting, the constant terrorism or conversational terrorism, we might bend, but we won't break.
Right. And this is, I think just before we go, because what I wanted to do is I wanted to take the second half of this discussion in the direction of self-reflection and privilege and that type of thing. But just before we end on this more, I guess, outward-facing systemic social note, is silence in this matter ever acceptable, Ken? I know it's a difficult question, and I know that it's a question that has a lot of gravity behind it.
It's not.
Is it ever acceptable?
No, it's not. No. I mean, we can look historically speaking and ask, how many atrocities and genocides existed, and how many people were silent during that time? No.
Understood. I think I've got one question that came in from an educator that is really good, that I think segues into something that I think we should talk about, which is, again, like I said before, the idea of looking inwardly and reflecting. Because if there's one thing that events like this happen, and they happen too frequently. We've got an educator in the chat, Eileen Winokur, one of our Wakelet ambassadors and our good friends, who said that she lived through the civil rights movements in the 60s, and she's saddened at the fact that we're still having to have this conversation today. So we need to look inwardly, I think. We've got a teacher who said, could you speak on the need for educators to self-reflect on their own beliefs and their own biases? Because we as people, I think that we go through processes. One of the awesome things about being human is that we have opinions, and these opinions can change. it reminds me of and I'm going a little bit off topic. It reminds me of I think he was a soul singer, a musician called Daryl Davis, I think, who
Yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah, and I read his story, and he created a book which was incredible, called A Black Man's Odyssey in the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, where he
And
converted a bunch of Klan members. Yeah. No,
yeah,
yes, Daryl Davis
yeah,
is amazing. Yeah.
incredible. Yeah, in the book he speaks about his experiences engaging in discussion with Ku Klux Klan members as a black man.
Yep.
It's that some parts of the book are absolutely terrifying. And through this, he had discussions with them. He befriended them purposely, and in doing so, humanized himself to the point where, like you said, most of the people that he had an impact on ended up, and I think some of them were very high up in the Ku Klux Klan as well.
They were.
Some of them
They
ended
were.
up completely abandoning their beliefs and actually sending him their robes. He now has a collection of Klan robes
Yeah.
of
In his
people that
home.
he's
Yeah. Yeah.
impacted.
Yeah.
Right. So it's clear that human beings have the power to make a 180, right? To be able to have their mind flipped and be like, I'm looking at this in the complete wrong way. So there is a need for us to look internally and check ourselves, I think. So I guess if what can educators do? And this goes back to the question that we asked. If the educator has not checked what they bring into the classroom,
Yeah.
is there a danger that they can unwittingly pass on their biases to and their microaggressions and their implicit biases and these types of things to their students, Ken?
They will. They will. So yes, that's an easy answer. Yes, they will. And this is precisely why it's critical for us to do the internal work before we worry about any of the external. It's precisely why, again, any lens around social and emotional learning or equity must begin with the internal work. I say this in several of the workshops I do. In order to have an equitable and inclusive learning environment, you must first become an equitable and inclusive person. And so, yeah, you do have to do that. I do want to mention that everyone in the chat, they should, Joe Rogan, regardless of how you feel about Joe Rogan, he did a 2-hour podcast of which he interviewed Daryl Davis, and it is absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
And
that's where I discovered it. Yeah.
yes, and the thing is here's the beauty of this, and this is why I love the fact that we have representation literally around the world. And by the way, everyone on the call, I'm sending all of you a virtual hug, because I know we all are managing and navigating some significant challenges. But I think, again, the beauty of the community is that we can all lean on each other, support each other, and grow with each other. But with that being said, so Daryl Davis, as Misbah said, Daryl Davis has written a book. I think he has a TED Talk as well, but I listened to the podcast and I've started to read his book as well, which I'm trying to balance that. And another book that I'm absolutely fascinated with right now is Minor Feelings by Cindy Park Hong. So that's another good one. Got lots of books. With that being said, though, is the catalyst for, and you'll know this, Ms. the catalyst for the conversations that Daryl Davis had with Klan members that ultimately helped them, get to know him better, humanize him, was music.
Right.
And this is where, and here's the thing, this is where for me, again, it's more than a privilege that I've been able to travel, is being able to make the cross-cultural connection. There was commonality that Daryl Davis had with Klan members was their love of music, the same music. So that served as the starter for the subsequent conversations. And that's where, if you think in terms of don't judge a book by its cover, for me, it's like, not only don't judge it by its cover, take the time to read the stories.
Mm.
And so for educators, for all of us, it's a byproduct of how well do you know your students? How well have you gotten to know your students? Then what stories are you exposing your students to that, and I'm going to share another metaphor that I love by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who's at the Ohio State University. And again, here's another one. It's critical that we cite our sources. And she uses a metaphor of every child's learning experience should be a mirror, a window, and a sliding glass door. I should see myself authentically reflected in the curriculum. There's your mirror. I learn more about myself. Even you shared how complex your identity is. I learn more about myself, which equips me with a better ability to now look through the mirror of my classmates and of the curriculum. I get a better understanding of myself, which helps me better understand a different cultural identity. And then in some cases, ideally, there's a scenario where I'm able to walk through the sliding glass door and immerse myself into that world. And it was Dr. Debbie Reese, who is a First Nations professor here in the United States. She said sometimes those windows have curtains on them, because sometimes you have to make the effort to pull the curtains back to then do it. Not everyone's just going to open up their culture for you to see. So, you know, and again, I think the beauty of all of that is that as you learn more about yourself, it serves as a sustainable catalyst to better understand others. Find more things you have in common than you have different, and then acknowledge and celebrate those differences, to where even, I mean, I know we can't share with everyone here, but you think about all the conversations you and I have had. It's just fascinating. It's fascinating. It's wonderful to learn more about others, especially once you develop a deeper understanding of yourself. And so our students, no matter where you are in the world, your students should be exposed to authentic narratives that are aligned with their cultural identity, as well as those of others. You know, no one should be telling your story for you, period.
We've got one statement in the chat that an educator made, and I think we can briefly address it, Ken, because we've had 3 or 4 people ask if it can be addressed.
Okay.
So somebody said, I don't want to be silent, but I want to know what to say. And I think that statement, I find it quite powerful, because I do believe that a lot of people are in that situation, Ken. They don't want to be silent, but at the same time, they don't know what to say. I know we touched on it earlier, but if there's a way of distilling that, if you can, into something bite-sized for us to take away, I think would
very
be
easily.
Yeah.
Action is not strictly indicative of words.
Right.
Sometimes you don't have to say anything; you just do.
Yeah. And then your actions obviously do a lot more than your words can.
Correct.
100%.
In fact, the actions can be the dictator of the words.
Yeah. So again, moving more into this theme of self-reflection, because as I mentioned earlier, people often have to have really difficult and often, uncomfortable conversations with themselves about this subject, more so than we think. I think we see a lot of people kind of going at each other. We've become numb to it online. I think a lot of people go after each other and butt heads about issues. It almost seems as though there isn't anything that can't cause an upset or an argument, especially on social media right now. So, but I often think that the biggest struggle comes when you're having conversations with yourself, because there's this really interesting concept of framing, right? It's where, if somebody's coming at you shouting and screaming, in order to win that discussion is for you to lower your voice as quiet as you can, because by screaming, you're matching their energy, and you lose the argument, because you're saying, okay, you're the person who is dictating how this conversation is going to go.
Right.
I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but there's a lot of things, and I wish that I could articulate myself as well as you do about these situations. But I guess what I'm trying to say
totally
is that
fine. That's why we're having this conversation.
There is this internal struggle with people attempting to understand whether or not they have this thing that we call privilege. And if they do, how much of it do they have? How does it affect their everyday lives? I mentioned before, like as somebody who's mixed race, and I know I've had this conversation with one of our educators who's also mixed race, Tisha Poncho, who's a good friend of Wakelet. Our way of interfacing with the world must be so radically different from other people's. And that's the same for everyone. That's the same from, regardless of who you are. We all have different ways of interfacing with the world based on our appearance, based on our race, based on our gender, lots of different things. So how do you figure that out in your head? How do you have that internal conversation with you? Am I privileged? What level of privilege am I at? You know what I mean? Could you speak a little bit on that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So privilege is a very complex thing to unpack, but a necessary thing. So all of us benefit from some type of privilege. So I'll share with everyone privileges that I benefit from being here in the United States. My first language is English. I'm able-bodied, and my gender identity is male. So those are 3 things that I recognize are privileges afforded to me. Okay. It doesn't make you a bad person to acknowledge those. What it does is it helps broaden your understanding of, okay, well, not everyone has the same gender identity as me. How can I better understand and be responsive to, or even learn from someone who doesn't? Which I follow a lot of educators who they're across the gender identity spectrum. And in fact, yesterday, an educator that I follow on Twitter shared with me some links to resources that she has around making social media posts more visually accessible, because she has a visual impairment. Okay. I knew some of it, but I'm like, good. Now I just took my time and read through it. I'm like, okay, here's even more that I need to know. So, again, acknowledging and recognizing privileges that we have, a lot of people get very defensive on it because, there's this whole idea of if I've been given something that you haven't, and I acknowledge it was given to me and not you, then it makes me a bad person, which is absolutely absurd. What it really needs to be is I recognize and acknowledge that there are things that I have that others don't. And now how do I support those that don't have what I have in a context that is respectful and responsive? And some people have put it in the chat. I love the Peggy McIntosh has a thing called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, and it's absolutely fantastic. And the interesting thing about that, so I'll give it away to the audience here, is when you go through that, if you'll notice, none of those conditions are a byproduct of economic access. Because that's the other thing that I notice happens in conversations I've had is, well, I grew up poor, so I didn't have privilege. Like, that's not, that's when you get into financial or economic access, which we can discuss that because that's one that is indiscriminate in regards to race or gender, anything like that. What it really boils down to here is even something as simple. I remember doing a workshop at a school, and I shared with all of the teachers a website where they have adhesive bandages that are in, it's like 5 different skin tones.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and that's one of Peggy McIntosh's conditions she lists. And I'm like, yeah, for my whole life, I could never find an adhesive bandage that matches that at all. Yeah. And I remember a couple of the teachers, they ordered it and they posted it on Twitter that they did it. And then there was an adult teacher who was an African-American female who posted that she was crying because she had never, 34 years old, never had an adhesive bandage that matched her skin tone. And so, and so there's all those little things that we have to be willing to acknowledge, and this is a key. And this is why I think a lot of people that really want to do this work and want to see a collective growth, and when I say collective, I mean global, don't let being defensive be your default. I mean, and that's why I'm sharing with everyone here. There are plenty of things that I recognize that I am afforded, either whether it's through my privileges or even my own experiences. And that's why I wanted to be clear and share with everyone what my experiences were, even in the classroom. Because again, I know especially amongst the educational community, that mental health is stigmatized, and it shouldn't be. And I will be vocal about it. Okay. So I think in terms of recognizing our degrees of privilege and then vulnerability, it will help humanize all of us so that we can all say, okay, you know what? Wow, that's it. I've experienced that too. And so, again, I know we're getting towards the end. I think for everyone on this call, the first step is to look internally and ask yourself, who, again, going back to it, who are my friends and who have I surrounded myself with? What stories have I exposed myself to? I saw someone did put in the chat, and by the way, it's my second favorite TED Talk of all of them, is The Danger of a Single Story. So if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend you watch that. And I think in terms of doing the internal work, it's, another thing, it's having compassion for yourself. I can't deviate from the screen, but there's a quiz that I do. It's a self-compassion test, and I do it every week. And it gives me it's a good check-in for the, asking yourself, how compassionate are you with yourself? Are you allowing yourself to be your whole true self? And in that context, if you are compassionate with yourself and you do recognize that, it broadens the doors, if you will, for you to be a more attentive listener and a more effective learner.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'm going to try to find it real quick while we're still on here, because it's something that I use. Like I said, I literally use it every week. And here it is. Yep. I'm going to put it in the chat right now. And it really does. There, I put it in the chat for everyone. it's a good self-check.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Oh, and Tisha added it. Thank you.
Yeah, I knew Tisha was going to get to the rescue as soon as she saw
thank
it.
you.
Yeah. I want to address two things, Ken, and again, these are quite hard-hitting topics, but I guess this is the type of conversation that we want to facilitate through all of this.
Right.
Somebody mentioned let me just check it because I don't want to. That's it. Somebody asked, what is the proper reaction to the looting that is taking place in so many cities? I think that what I've seen online, a lot of personally, is people who, and this may be, I don't know if this is an issue of gaslighting. I don't know if that even comes into it, but it's like people are looking at it and saying, is the response to this to destroy your own cities? That's what people are saying, and I think that a lot of people, whether they like it or not, probably do share that sentiment. So what's your take on the rioting that's going on in a lot of US cities right now? Because we've got the peaceful protests that even here in the UK are happening, and this is, George Floyd's death, rest in peace, has sparked a lot of this,
Right.
a lot of stuff around the world. But in specific, with regard to the rioting, when people bring up rioting as almost as like a defense, if you will, is that something about, is that a question of gaslighting, or how do you deal with that? How do you?
Right. So let's be clear on terminology. There's a difference between rioting, protesting, and a demonstration. Okay. Rioting is a bunch of people acting crazy, burning cars because their sports team won a championship. That's rioting. Okay. Protesting is a group of folks, whatever their perspective or position is, that are saying, we're done. The system that's designed is adversely affecting us as a group, or we identify with that and we're done. A demonstration is a protest in action. See, so I can protest the racist structure of the curriculum by saying, I'm not going to use this list of books. I'm going to use a different list. That's a protest. Demonstration would be the entire, using books, for example, the entire English department saying, we're done with these lists of books because they perpetuate a whole lot of myths and a whole lot of otherisms, and we're going to go to this. As far as the looting goes, looting is all based on perspective. I am not for the violence and the looting in that capacity. But I will tell you, if you look at many of the economic structures that are a byproduct of the capitalism, that's looting that occurs on a daily basis. Think about that. Think about the income inequality, the economic access inequality. That's looting. So again, perspective. Am I for people going and breaking windows and stealing things out of stores? Absolutely not. For everyone in the chat, I'll share with you all that, I was here in Los Angeles in the middle of the riots in 1992, the protests, the demonstrations. And there was a lot of the looting. And that is exactly what you said. People are like, well, why are they burning down things in their own neighborhood? A lot of the businesses that got burned down, no one in the neighborhood owned those businesses. So they weren't burning down their own neighborhood. So to me, it's really looking at what is the catalyst for that. And that's where people, it is, I think in terms of the media, to some degree, it is a type of gaslighting to focus on the riots and the looters and not recognize that how much of this could have been avoided if we had, equal economic access, if we had, equality within our educational access, if George Floyd was not murdered in the street for, and I'm telling this to everyone in here because I didn't sleep last night. It's $20, $20. I don't know if it's been put out on the media, but the police were called because the store thought he used a $20 counterfeit bill. So think about all the times 911 has been called. Think about all the times that someone has weaponized the police against a Black body. $20. So
Yeah, I think it's again, like you said, and I think that one of the things that a lot of people picked up on the chat is about perspective. And like you said, it's all fair and well to focus on what the outcome is, but when you look at the genesis of what sparked this off, it's somebody calling the cops on a Black man because of an alleged counterfeit $20 bill.
$20.
Yeah.
Not like, this looks counterfeit, we can't sell you these items.
Yeah. Yeah.
$20.
It's
The
extremely
value of his life was a counterfeit $20 bill that it was taken from him.
yeah, yeah. It's extremely saddening. I want to obviously we're coming to the end now, and it's been an incredible hour, Ken, honestly, and I think that it's been extremely valuable to the community. I want to address one last thing. We have somebody from Nigeria who's joined us in the chat, and they've been looking to try and get that answer, an answer from you, or should I say a comment from you, really. They want to talk about low self-esteem as a contributor to both fundamentalism and also a whole bunch of other things. He says that we're trying to educate people in Nigeria about issues like this, because even in Nigeria, even in Africa, they still face, classism and all sorts of isms, as you can imagine. So low self-esteem, how does it play a part in not only kind of perpetuating this this kind of cycle of violence? I'm not sure what it's called now, a self-fulfilling prophecy, if I recall my sociology class. But also on the other side as well, in creating people who are, fundamentalists and who are on the other side of this. Could you comment on that, the concept of self-esteem leading to these things?
A good friend of mine is from Nigeria. He and I, in fact, I will share with everyone, you should follow him on Instagram. His name is Tayo Roxon. He's actually doing this month, a whole month worth of lessons around bias. And he and I are going to try to do an IGTV conversation at the end of the month. And we've talked about that. And so to your question around, self-esteem, it goes back to the whole idea around a social hierarchy. If you create the conditions for someone to not feel good about themselves, it makes it easier for you to put yourself above them. And then in terms of that, how frequently do we see, or do we actually, in many cases, not see that essentially propagated in our educational systems? If you don't, and it's, I'll give you an example real quick, because I know we're up towards the end.
Sure.
I'm just going to use science as an example. If the only exposure to any significant scientific achievements that I see, let's say I start off school and I love science, and actually I did. Let's say I start off school and I love science. If the only exposure I have to significant scientific figures and significant scientific achievements is only a white male, what am I going to feel about myself in relation to that particular content? And so, it does exist across the board. And I recognize some of the social hierarchical challenges that exist in Nigeria, again, because I've had those conversations with Tayo. I wanted to talk to him about those things. But, I think for us, without being an expert in that area, but having read a lot of Dr. Brene Brown's books and things like that, I think part of the key to that is being able to have a better understanding of yourself and have compassion for yourself. And then for us as educators, it's really supporting those areas of growth in all of our students. Because ultimately, if we operate from a perspective of we are less than, then our brains are not optimized for learning in the first place.
Exactly. I think that's a very poignant piece to end on, Ken. I just want to say I really appreciate you. I know that we made this decision to kind of change the narrative and the scope of this. At the beginning, it was about equity, and I just felt that in terms of some of the voices that could be listened to, and people who could speak about this subject with the education and having had the life experiences that you have, I appreciate that you've come on today and helped share these ideas and these concepts with the community. I think it's been extremely positive, and I hope that everybody goes away with some newfound perspectives, and I know that I certainly will. Just to answer some of the questions in the chat that aren't related to the actual topic, This entire session will be recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube, and you will have access with it hopefully within the next 48 hours. You'll also get a certificate of attendance for joining this if you have signed up to this using your email address. And Ken has also really kindly provided a list of a document that we'll be sharing as a collection included in this package that has a lot of the resources that he's been speaking about today. In addition to that, the chat has been phenomenal. This is by far the most engaged and the most lively and the most thoughtful and empathetic chat that we've had this week, and I think in all of the webinars that we've ever done at Wakelet. So I want to thank everybody in the chat for not only being here today, but also contributing to this discussion that is really needed. So we will be doing something a little bit different, and I will personally be trying to go through the chat and at least create some kind of transcript that we can share in the doc as well, because I know that everybody's been sharing some amazing
They
links as
have,
well.
and I put a few comments in there. I for those of you that are still on before you go, I do want to just say, look, I really appreciate the fact that you all took just over an hour out of your busy, crazy days to join Misbah and myself on this. I think that we need to make sure that the conversations do not cease a week, a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year from now. We must continue to have them, and ultimately, there's strength in the community, and the more we can keep the community well connected, and the more that we can be there for each other, be there with each other, and support each other's growth. That's how you create sustainability in what we're doing, and we'll all be better for it.
Thank you so much, Ken. I think exactly as you said, and I know that we have had some comments coming as well. It's very frustrating that this seems to happen in peaks and troughs, and I think that we're all guilty of that to some extent. We seem to wait until incidents like this happen before we shout out and scream about it and cause a fuss, and yet it continually happens, and then we find ourselves in the same situation as we were in a month ago or a week ago, and in some cases even hundreds of years ago or 60 years ago or whatever it may be. So, from me as well, obviously we at Wakelet, we understand that this is a community that is healthy, that is positive, and that is empowered. And we want to help facilitate these discussions because we feel like they're important. And I really want to thank you, Ken. And as Ken says, I echo that the things that we've learned today, I'd love for us to keep on them and keep talking about them and keep that conversation going for as long as possible, because it shouldn't take things like this to happen in order for us to even have these conversations. But unfortunately, that's the way that it is. Yeah. Ken, I'd love to give you the last word just before we close up. We will be leaving the chat open for a few minutes, just so that everybody can scroll up and grab your links quickly and communicate between yourselves. But I'm going to give the last word over to Ken, and then we can mute our screens. Ken, you can click leave, and I'll leave this running,
okay.
And then you guys can all chat for the next 5-10 minutes or so. So
yeah,
over to you, Ken. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, it's just really just thank you, merci, grazie, danke, arigato gozaimasu. I can keep going. To everybody for joining us. I wish I could say thank you in literally every single language that we had representation here, but my sentiment is sincere. My thoughts are genuine, and my love is universal. And so I thank everyone for joining. And I did put in the chat that I hope that at some point our collective paths will cross somehow, somewhere, some way, where we can sit down and have coffee, tea, or break bread together and talk about this and how we're supporting each other and what we're going to do next, again, as far as the strength of our community.
Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you. There's still just under 700 people in the chat room, so I'll be leaving this open for a few more minutes.
Yeah, and I love how everyone typed in thank you. I forgot obrigado.
Yeah, it's a beautiful word in every language, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for joining us, everybody. Thank you. We hope that you enjoy the rest of Community Week. And again, as we say, we're celebrating educators, we're celebrating this community, and we're still staying mindful of all the issues that are going on in the world. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.